Welcome everybody to the NutraStrong Campfire Nutrition Podcast. We're delighted today to be joined by one of our key staff members and team leaders, Tania John. Tania, welcome to our podcast today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the time. So before we get into some regulatory affairs style topics, Tania, tell us a bit about you, yourself, your role here, your title, and what Tania John does at SGS Nutrasource.
Sure, yeah, happy to get into it. So my role is VP of Natural Health Product and Pharmaceutical Regulatory Sciences. It's a mouthful.
Okay.
But you obviously were part of this, but we did the rebrand a couple years ago, and just based on the Canadian regulatory framework for natural health products, they're regulated as a subset of drugs in Canada. It just made sense that's what the department name would be called.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of stuff does it cover then?
So the way we group it, pharmaceutical is mainly North America that we cover, but also have global service offerings. And then for NHP, what we've done is labeled it Nutra. So it's not just natural health products. Of course, that's our bread and butter. That's what we started in. But we've since branched out. So under that Nutra umbrella, we've got cosmetics. We've got veterinary health products, which are very similar to natural health products. We have got food. I think that is it under the Nutra umbrella. And then, of course, NHP.
Okay. And the term NHP, or natural health product, what jurisdiction is that from? What does that cover?
Right, so that's Canadian specific. And it covers, so like I said, it's regulated as a subset of drugs, so we have a lot of the drug dosage forms available to us in Canada under the natural health product framework. So it's not only your oral tablets, capsules, liquids, we've got even some food-like dosage forms like powders, gummies, and then we also have topical application as well, even some suppositories. So things that you wouldn't ordinarily expect as a natural health supplement, they are those in Canada.
And for those joining us from other countries, which does tend to happen from time to time, what would be the equivalent in, say, the U.S. or Europe? What would NHPs be called?
So dietary supplement in the U.S. would probably be the most similar equivalent, but you have a lot of overlap, but then you do have some exceptions where something would be considered a dietary supplement in the U.S., but maybe a food in Canada, or vice versa. It's an NHP here, it could be a drug there. And then in Europe, food supplement would probably be the closest equivalent category.
Right. So there is overlap in these areas, but it's not exactly the same because of how they're regulated. And would you say the NHPs in Canada, the way they're regulated, is unique on the world stage?
I would. Yeah, I would. I think a lot of other jurisdictions lean closer to the food side of things. So it is a unique setup here compared to other jurisdictions.
Cool. And then with that, the way it's regulated in Canada, what allows, or why would companies be interested in launching in Canada, and what makes the NHP world in Canada so different to dietary supplements in the US or food supplement in the EU?
Right. Yeah. So even though Canada is a smaller market compared to the US, it is still appealing. We get a lot of, with that drug overarching framework, we get a lot of drug-like claims. So we have treatment, prevention of diseases, and claims that we can make against those categories that a dietary supplement would not be able to do under that category. It would be a drug. So that way, you could have the same supplement or natural health product marketed very differently in the US than Canada. In Canada, you can carry a lot more aggressive claims on pack.
And why do you think that's beneficial, or why do you think that's a good thing, or not a good thing, perhaps?
It sets it apart. So, there may be an ingredient or product that we know does work. Maybe it's for inflammation or pain that consumers need that product, and now we can actually say what it's meant for versus something else.
And how does that benefit the consumer, the Canadian consumer versus consumers in other jurisdictions, in your opinion?
More access to self-care. So, maybe they're not able to get into see their family physician. Maybe it's something that they just want to, keep up with preventative medicine, but they're able to do a lot of that and hold their health in their own hands with this framework.
Super. And how long has this framework been in place in Canada?
So the regulations came into play in 2004. So just a few years before I actually started in the industry, but 2004.
Okay.
So 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
20-year veteran of the industry.
Not quite.
Almost
So
there.
I started in 2007.
Okay.
So while the regulations were fairly fresh.
Okay. And with that, how have they developed and evolved since they first came out in terms of enhancements and advancements that have helped the consumer and companies for that matter and brands?
Sure. So I think when they came out, there wasn't a lot of awareness of what these regulations are, how they're applied. So there was a period in time in which, you would remember this, exemption numbers.
Yes.
So you were able to sell without a natural product number, an NPN. You were able to sell with an exemption number until you were issued your NPN.
Yeah, it's like a bridging the gap.
Which
tactic.
went on for quite a while until the unlicensed product regulations were repealed. So there was that period where we were allowed to sell with that exemption or number or EN, and then NPNs were enforced once UPLAR was repealed.
Well, UPLAR was the
Unlicensed product regulations,
Yeah.
and I believe that was 2013 or 2014.
Yeah. I like to unpack acronyms for our millions of viewers
UPLAR?
out there. Yes.
Not
Right.
very common.
When you're competing with the Super Bowl for ratings, so I just want to make sure that we unpack our acronyms. Okay, very good. And then what are some of the proposed changes now, which are causing a lot of fervor in the Canadian landscape federally, that really have the industry questioning where all this is going in the Canadian market?
Yeah, so proposed fees for natural health products, that was something that was released by Health Canada last May.
And why is that significant? We'll stop right there for a second. Why would that be significant? What does that mean for the industry?
Yeah, great question, because up until now, we have not had any form of cost recovery. So
Which means brands that are submitting haven't needed to pay an application fee.
Correct.
Yeah.
Not like drugs or medical devices, there's some sort of cost recovery tied to those.
Yeah.
Versus natural health products, especially it's a newer set of regulations that did not come into play yet. So that was proposed last May.
And why is that significant? Obviously, brands having to pay versus previously not having to pay is one thing, but what are the proposed costs and fees now associated with that cost recovery?
Yeah, I think that's where it becomes significant.
Okay.
I think from an industry perspective, cost recovery was always on the table and something that many of us expected. I just think we weren't expecting to see these kind of numbers. So, for example, there's different classes of product license applications, 1, 2, and 3. They've come out with a novel subclass 3, but have not defined it.
Okay.
So we don't know what falls under that bucket, and then they've proposed a fee up to $58,000 for those types of applications.
58,000 Canadian.
Canadian,
Yeah.
yes, correct.
So roughly 45 to 50K US.
Which is significant.
Yes, per SKU?
Per SKU, significant from going from 0
Yes.
to that.
Yeah.
It's proposed to come into effect April 1st, 2025. So there was significant industry feedback. I think Health Canada received 5,000 plus responses to the proposal. So I think the most commentary received on such a proposal. I dare to say that. I don't know. I think
Certainly, for
significant.
the Canadian political scene, that's a movement.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, save our supplements, definitely a movement. So with that, Health Canada has said that they're going to go back to the table, draw something else up, and come back to us with a revised proposal. We have not seen that yet. So I don't anticipate it's going to be, up to that 58,000. It's going to be something else, but it's still going to be a significant fee. And especially this industry too, it's not like pharmaceuticals. We're heavily taxed, right? So they're getting about, Canadian government, $2.8 billion in tax revenue from this industry.
Already,
so
sales tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's something that, and it's also not covered for consumers, right? You have to pay out of pocket for these.
Yeah, I think some benefit programs might have some health spending or slight copay, but for the most part, it's out of people's own pockets, right? Yeah.
So, again, that there's a pool of money sitting there that could be used for cost recovery, versus taxing this industry even more.
And that 58,000 Canadian, or roughly called 50K US a SKU, is that retroactive or is that all in net new SKUs? So the NHPs that have already been authorized for the Canadian market, would they now be charged this? Or is it from this day forward just on new applications? What's being proposed?
Yeah, great question, and that reminds me there's other elements to this cost recovery proposal that includes a right to sell fee. So no, it would not be retroactive where they fall under this, novel subclass 3. They wouldn't have to pay $58,000 if they were already licensed, but they do have to pay, I think it's around just over $500 for a right to sell per SKU. So per product license that you have this right to sell fee. So for companies with, over 100 SKUs, that cost right there to maintain their product licenses is significant on its own.
Yeah, and who does that get passed on to ultimately?
In my opinion, it's going to go to the consumer. I don't think there's a way to shelter them from that cost unless the company absorbs it. But then at that point, is there a point to doing business in Canada? Are they going to be able to sustain with that
certainly
kind of cost?
new entries will have to have a very hard look at the return on investment, and Canada is a smaller market. In and itself is always a tough decision to launch into, especially because of the land mass of Canada, right? And distribution and logistics. There's a lot to think through and a lot of unique costs associated with the Canadian market. Then you have the French-English language situation that brands need to navigate as well, which is important, of course. So in that respect, this seems like another huge barrier to entry for companies looking to, even Canadian firms who are trying to innovate and do product innovation. How do you think it's going to impact the mindset of new products coming into Canada, which offer new benefit based upon new science, which is happening all the time? Seems like Canadian consumers could be cut off from some pretty interesting products as well.
Definitely. One thing that's really good about the Canadian system is that we do have Health Canada monographs that pre-clear certain product ingredients or classes of products like probiotics. So that's really helpful for applicants to leverage, but what I think this cost recovery proposal does is limit them to just what's on monograph. And ingredients may be monographed, but for very low risk claims. So, source of antioxidants versus, vitamin C may do a lot more than that. So with any new science, to leverage that, now you're going to get pushed into a new application category. So will applicants, will brands want to pursue that? I'm not sure. I likely not.
And then what is happening politically in terms of this as a federal issue alongside all the political issues of the day? How is this sort of coming to the surface as one of the key issues? Is it coming to the surface, and how is that dynamic working at the federal level from what you're seeing?
Yeah, so as Canadian Health Food Association members, so CHFA members, I've been able to participate on their Regulatory Affairs Advisory Council, which includes food and NHP working group. And through that involvement, I attended their most recent Hill Day in November. So we were in Ottawa as a delegation and got to meet with several different MPs. Our meetings were all with the Conservative Party of Canada, but then we've also had other discussions. Other delegates also met with Liberal and NDP MPs as well. But I think everybody is aware of the issue, some more than others. And then and again, this is a little bit skewed because I've only been speaking to Conservative MPs, but this is really I think a platform for them and the party.
So that's one area that federal election platform-wise, that's going to be one of the platform issues.
It definitely seems like it because everybody we've spoken to, they're very well versed on the proposal, the impact to Canadians, to companies, and what would this look like in the future? So a lot of good discussions going on about it, and I think ultimately you may have this is something too, before CHFA is great this way because I was able to get this kind of involvement, and it is kind of intimidating meeting with government officials, but at the end of the day they're just people like us, and they want to do right by Canadians.
Yes.
Really, they're appointed to serve the Canadian public. So
at least we hope so.
Well, yeah. No, but when you're talking to them, they just want to do the right thing.
Right.
And a lot of 71, I would argue it's probably more than that, than 71% of Canadians take natural health products. So this issue really affects everybody.
Oh, absolutely. And then when you look at other jurisdictions, particularly to the south of us in the U.S., obviously government's mandate in terms of FDA and Health Canada is to keep their population safe. Everybody understands that who's involved in this industry. However, there seems to be some key areas being singled out. We have this bigger issue in Canada, but even in the U.S., in certain key states, which I would say are bellwether states for the entire country, New York State, California, there's been some very aggressive legislative approaches to certain types of products, and just in general, there seems to be a lot more activity on targeting dietary supplement categories in the U.S. in some of these key states. And now with this up in Canada, what do you think is leading to, or what do you think is behind this sort of government sentiment about not just, hey, we're going to protect this safety-wise, but we're going to, go after whole categories without, and it really, to me, it almost comes across like a shoot first and ask questions later approach. But what do you think is leading to that general mood towards this industry, in your experience?
So what I'm hearing, it's a lot of buying into big pharma and what, how they're positioning their products. Maybe it's that, after COVID, so many consumers turn to natural health product offerings, supplement offerings to maintain and promote their health versus prescription drugs. That's the general tone.
Okay, that's driving it. But yeah, the interesting thing to me is that a lot of pharma companies, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, also have whole nutritional divisions,
that's also
right?
True, yeah.
And a lot of them come through as CPGs, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And those firms have OTC products. They have the full range of, they can have functional food and functional beverages all the way through to prescription pharmaceuticals and supplements and so forth in between. And some of the most popular NHPs or dietary supplements that people would recognize in the world are owned by pharmaceutical companies, but they're not exclusively pharmaceutical companies. So, and a pharmaceutical company that has a nutritional division, or a company that has both a pharma and a nutritional group, they don't want to add expenses either.
No, right? And I don't even. They would probably be the only ones that are able to afford and maintain this. Yeah. But again, would they even want to put that investment in?
Right. But then they're having to take money from other business units to apply to this area, because probably that specific business unit, if it was carved out, would be it'd be far more challenging budget-wise,
Mhm.
right, to fund and support a SKU if this new legislation comes through. So it's very interesting to me that oftentimes I find that big pharma is a bit of a scapegoat for this, but at the same time, I also think that they're involved in the natural product industry themselves.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's just the general buzz, but at the same time, also who knows why the government does what they do anyways.
Yeah.
The decision making, you're just not sure, because if it's about the health and safety of Canadians or Americans, there's a lot of other policies in place that are not protecting the health and safety of the population.
Right. Yeah. So, very, very good and interesting point. So it's always a bit of an enigma to unpack why certain things happen. Oftentimes, you want to follow the money, and I think an easy answer is pharma, but at the same time, like we just talked about, and there may be other forces at play that are unseen and unheard,
Quite likely.
that we're not privy to or necessarily understand. From the standpoint of the future, what are you seeing and thinking and feeling as it relates to this proposed legislation and what's going to inevitably happen, or what are the sort of the different pathways available where this could end up?
Yeah, it could be somewhere in the middle of what was originally proposed and what industry pushed back on. And not just industry, regular Canadians. I've run into people at events that they mailed postcards themselves, and so it's not just industry that's concerned about this. It's regular Canadians that want access to their natural health products.
Right.
So it could be somewhere in the middle. It could be much reduced fees, which there wasn't a lot of consultation on this before it was released. Whereas I think if they had come out with something a little bit more reasonable, then, but how do you bridge that gap between that upwards of, 58,000 and zero? What does that look like? So
Per SKU.
Yeah, or per unique product license.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would be hopeful that it would come down to something that's, very modest. Like the right to sell fee, that's really what I would consider would be reasonable for a novel class 3. So I don't know how we get there, but that would be my hope.
That would be a good starting point.
Yeah.
To begin some cost recovery. I think a lot of brands and supply chains could understand that. But.
Yeah, I think that's a misconception about this industry, that we're completely opposed to cost recovery. I don't think that's the case, because like you said, with these other CPG pharma companies, they're used to paying some sort of fee on their other products. So I don't necessarily think that, but the way it was kind of rolled out, we don't know. We don't know, and there's other pieces of this. There's the site licensing side, where sites are now subject to fees as well for their site license renewal, new applications. And in terms of manufacturing in Canada, what does that do for new players that want to get into the market?
Right.
And then plain language labeling, that's another piece to this, where they proposed PLL for natural health products, but is this something that is user friendly? So again, we didn't have a ton of consultation, options available to us at the time, and it's in effect. So with that too, there's also environmental considerations, and Environment and Climate Change Canada, they haven't been consulted. We don't know what they're going to come out with, and then is there going to be another revamp for brands to comply with those new standards? Plus plain language labeling. So that's also a concern. So there's so many things.
Multiple layers to this.
Multiple layers and unanswered questions where it just need a pause and a reset, essentially, to refresh, regroup, and come up with a better plan for this industry. Because with plain language labeling, we do a lot of copy reviews here.
Yes, we do.
We do, but to fit all of that information on pack, it's quite challenging. And then as a consumer, am I going to read through all of this? Whereas maybe, it's a QR code and then I just look it up myself. But just having some sort of conversations or options around it, we need to go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm. Back to the drawing board with Tania John. I like it. And then in terms of where you see other jurisdictions going from all the conversations you have in our industry out there in the marketplace, Canada, and I think you would agree, has sort of been the envy of the world for how we've actually got something right in an industry.
Right.
Our federal government has. And that's this natural health product pathway.
Right.
Yeah, it had its bumps and bruises since 2004, but it's in a good spot, and it provides product innovation and more advanced claims, so people truly understand the benefit more so than they might otherwise with wishy-washy, watered-down claims that are more food-like in nature, which is, I think, one of the benefits. So what are your concerns about sort of us being the envy of the world in this category, and then it's almost like we're putting ourselves back to where everyone else is at in a way.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because we were and still currently are the gold standard. We are the gold standard, and we see this all the time with companies that don't even want to sell here, but they want the natural product number. They want that approval through Health Canada because that means something across the world.
In China and India, EU, wherever, right? Other jurisdictions.
Yeah, so having gone through the Health Canada review and approval process is meaningful to these companies and brands.